Good evening, folks. We're so glad that you could come tonight. This launches our 2024-2025 presentations for the winter, and most of them are somehow connected to the exhibit that we now have up in the Goodman. So if you haven't seen it, please do come see it. It's on architecture. So we're trying to touch all the points about architecture. What are the resources that go into it? Who are the people that manipulated the resources? And what were the aesthetics that created the different kinds of architectures here in Napa Valley? And we are extremely lucky tonight to be able to have our guests. We have two sons of California here tonight that have gone to, we won't say the dark side, but they have gone to South Dakota, and they are at North State University in Aberdeen, which is, if you haven't been to Aberdeen, it's a gorgeous city in our town, maybe a better word, in South Dakota. First off is our speaker tonight, and that is Ric Dias. Ric was born and raised in Northern California. He attended the University of California at Riverside in history and gained his PhD by 1995. He now is a professor at Northern State University in Aberdeen, and he has written his book and several articles on Kaiser Steel and Henry Kaiser. So tonight we really get to hear all about it. For those of you who are a little older in the audience, not saying there's anyone really old in the audience, but if you are, you will remember that we had Kaiser Steel and Basalt at the southern end of town, that we are known as the county of stone bridges, and that's, we have just really benefited from having these big corporate ventures in the town in terms of economic growth. We also tonight have a moderator. We are very lucky. Once again, we have Lucas Wiscons with us. Dr. Wiscons is a professor of criminal justice. He's a sociologist that got his degree out of UC Santa Cruz, and is also at NSU Aberdeen. And so, gentlemen, I welcome you. Thank you so much for spending your Thursday evening in October with us as we kick off our year-long set of presentations. So please take it away.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that warm introduction, Shelley. It's great to be here with you all. I have the pleasure of being here with Dr. Dias tonight. Dr. Dias, could you start us off just by maybe describing why you decided to write this book?
Oh, yeah, sure. So I grew up in Northern California, as Shelley said, but I didn't grow up next to a Kaiser facility. I wasn't born in a Kaiser hospital. But instead, I was aware of Kaiser as a kid because of Kaiser products. I have a picture here. When I was a kid in Northern California, it's hard to miss these on the highways. This is a Kaiser sand and gravel truck, and find a need to fill it was one of Kaiser's adages. And so I would see these on the road, and well, it's hard not to notice them. As I just said, it's hard to unsee that image once you've seen it a couple of times. So I grew up seeing Kaiser trucks, Kaiser equipment, and also I grew up aware of the automobile that Kaiser made for several years. And this is my Kaiser car. I bought it 40 years ago, bought it in Sebastopol, California. And everyone in your audience, I'm sure, knows of Sebastopol if they haven't been there. So I bought this in an apple orchard in 1981, right after my 21st birthday. I was living in Petaluma at the time. So I had wanted a Kaiser automobile for years, right? So between Kaiser products, this and that and the other thing, I became aware of Kaiser, Henry John Kaiser and his empire. And then once I finally made it to school as a graduate student, I was taking a course on American capitalism, and my advisor was teaching the course, and he said, all right, I want all you guys to do a 50-page research paper on some example of a modern capitalist enterprise. And so I'm thinking, well, what's around Riverside that's, hey, wait a minute, Kaiser had a steel mill in Fontana. And there it is, right? So that was the subject of my dissertation. went on and did my first book on something else, but I came back and did this recent book 2 years ago on Kaiser Steel that you just mentioned there, Shelley.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So you sort of live in a Kaiser world, or lived in a Kaiser world.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit more about Henry Kaiser? Who was this guy?
You know, he really has had a most amazing life. And I don't think it's too much to say that he is one of America's sort of outstanding business figures of the 20th century. So he is mentioned in innumerable books and articles because of his career. And so the legacy he left is huge. So he was extraordinary in that way. But on a more personal level, you know, I've done some digging. I've talked to people who've met Kaiser and were related to Kaiser and so forth. And every story I hear paints the same kind of picture, that he was positive, that he was uplifting, that he was fair, that he liked to laugh. He was also a terrible driver, an awful temper if you pushed him, you know, fond of women. You know, and so he was a real character, a real person, but he was also, I think, a very positive character. And so people liked him. People were willing to work very, very hard for him. He had a number of like people around him that worked for him for 50 years, would work for him 7 days a week for decades. So he was able to get that kind of loyalty out of people. So he really was an extraordinary person on a lot of levels. But I think what's interesting, that he might have been an extraordinary person, extraordinary businessman, but he had a most ordinary upbringing. Kaiser was not born to money or affluence. I have a picture here of Kaiser's. This is his. Oh, I can make it work here. Here we go. This is his birthplace, and he was born in well, I think this has been so long now. I went to Google and I Googled, this is like years ago, I Googled the town he's from, Sprout Brook, New York. It's rather near Albany, right? And it's called a hamlet. Henry Kaiser was born in a hamlet of Sprout Brook, New York. And he had immigrant parents from Germany. And so he didn't grow up with great money or great affluence, but he grew up very ambitious and hardworking. So one thing that's interesting about Kaiser's upbringing, I think that a lot of the people in the audience can maybe remember this, can connect to this, if they have figures in their family. My father's father never completed high school, for example. That's pretty common back in the day. And this particular grandfather of mine was born in 1910. Henry Kaiser was born in 1882, but you know, the late 19th, early 20th century, millions of people didn't complete high school in America. In my grandfather's case, he had cows to milk, right? And that's more important than learning history or mathematics in school, right? So Henry Kaiser went to years of public school, but did not complete high school, which was, once again, not very out of the ordinary at that time. And he left work, as far as I could tell, or he left school, I should say, to work, but not because he was pushed out of the house. So there wasn't a story there of like grinding poverty or substance abuse or neglect that pushed him out of the school, into schoolyard, into the workplace. As far as I can tell, and different sources all kind of corroborate here, that he wanted to work. And when he got to his first few jobs, he exhibited this kind of enthusiasm for work, which was seen his entire life. So there's any number of sources that folks in the audience can access to find people who knew Kaiser and heard about his life and his stories. But Kaiser would talk about his youth often, and I did talk about his mother and her health problems, which helped spur him to create the HMO, by the way. But that didn't have some with multiple sclerosis. It's another reason why he created that HMO, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But Kaiser's stories about his youth were always very positive. But when he got out into the workplace and he began to get these jobs, he never seemed to keep them very long. He would go from job to job, usually in retail in New York, and he seemed to be kind of restless, though, right? And one job that he had there for a couple of years, not long, was a photography business in Lake Placid. And he had this big sign on the outside of the the building, meet the man with the smile, and that would be him. So I'll put his picture back of Henry
Oh.
back on. That's meet the man with the smile. He's a kid at the time, right? But and he promised his customers the fastest, cheapest photos with the best service, right? And so it was that kind of ethos that he brought to work right away. Not to get too ahead of the story here, but Kaiser took that same enthusiasm to work, and he applied to everything he did up until he's well into his senior years. He loved to work. If it's possible, he lived to work and worked to live. I mean, it kind of worked both ways for Henry Kaiser, and so that helps explain how he got so much done. He didn't rest much.
Huh.
And in a way, he'd be a terrible boss because he'd be calling you literally at Sunday nights. Your kid's birthday, your kid's got an earache.
Yeah.
Well, you're gonna have one now because I'm gonna be talking in it. So he was a difficult boss because he wanted everyone to be as enthused as he was about work.
Yeah.
Mm.
Wonderful. So Rick was mentioning my daughter is sick with an earache right now. He's not my boss, but he did call me in on a Thursday night for this.
That's true.
So so Henry Kaiser he sounds like a high profile, very famous individual, successful builder. What was that path like for him?
It was unexpected. He started out in retail and so forth. Henry Kaiser loved people and being around people, and he loved women. So when he was young, he loved girls, and he found one that he was smitten with in New York, and he wanted to put a ring on her finger. The father, and a lot of us can relate to this, the father was skeptical of this young Kaiser fella, right? And so insisted that Kaiser prove his ability to be a provider for his daughter.
Uh-huh.
And so Kaiser said, I'll go to sounds like out of some kind of like old novel or something. I'm going to go to the West. I'm going to make my fortune and prove myself, and then you'll give me your daughter's hand. And okay. And so true to his word, Henry Kaiser got on a train in the early 20th century and went out to the Pacific Northwest, found himself in British Columbia, and then in the Seattle area, and started hooking up with various businesses, like in hardware. He soon made his way into municipal construction and made a fortune. Well, he was successful right away. And with that, the father was sufficiently impressed. And so Kaiser was able to win this woman's hand. And that's his first wife, Bess. And they were married for about half a century.
Wow.
Right? So he was a contractor in British Columbia, in Washington. He starts to make his way down south into California, and in the 1920s, he finally makes his base of operations Oakland. And Oakland will be the mothership. That will be Ground Central. That'll be Kaiser Central, right? And for our audience in here, for those who are familiar with Oakland at all, this is getting ahead of the story a little bit. You've no doubt seen this building on Lake Merritt. This is Kaiser Center, which is built about the time I'm born, about 1959, 1960, right? There it is there, the annual report, Kaiser Steel. And that sort of reflects the presence, the footprint that Kaiser had in Oakland, right? Kaiser Center is still there. It still says Kaiser Center on it. Kaiser no longer owns that building, right? But Kaiser, I'm not sure if it might be the family foundation, still ironically, is now a renter in Kaiser Center, right? So he sets up shop there, and he's a contractor, right? And the jobs get bigger. He's working on Highway 99 in the central part of California. He starts to branch out, right? He's very ambitious, and he builds the Trans-Cuban Highway, which is no small feat, right? He starts to get a name for himself, and he's pushing. And these jobs of his, they start out as municipal jobs, parking lots, streets, sidewalks. They move up to the Trans-Cuban Highway. By the 1930s, Kaiser's ready for the big show, for the big time. And so Kaiser will attach himself to some projects that are so huge. I hate to use the word monumental, but I mean, Hoover Dam, Grand Coulee Dam, Bonneville Dam, these are huge. These aren't built by Kaiser himself. Kaiser had plenty of confidence and plenty of ability, but no single company is going to build Hoover/Boulder Dam. So a consortium of firms, including Kaiser, built Hoover Dam starting during the latter parts of the Herbert Hoover administration, right? And so Hoover Dam is going to be this first huge project that Kaiser works with other contractors like Bechtel, Shea, Knudsen, and others. Some of these names are still around today. And while Kaiser was working in this consortium, he wore a lot of hats. Tireless Kaiser, right? So he was wearing lots of hats. So one of his hats was point man in Washington, D.C., right? Another one of his hats was deal with the press, be our face, right? Be the face of six companies, right? So Kaiser gets this lesson on how to open doors in Washington and how to deal with press. He gets a PR man. In fact, this PR man will become Al Heiner will become one of his biographers later, as a matter of fact. And so Kaiser was working on his image for decades, right, to make sure he had the right kind of persona out there to get these big deals and so forth. So Kaiser starts building on this infrastructure in the early part of the 20th century. And then he starts to get this presence in the American imagination. We have a few business people who are huge. They are like these, folk heroes. There's so many figures, right? You got a Warren Buffett or an Elon Musk or something like that. The Apple guy. I mean, there are a small number of business people who capture the imagination of people. People look up to them. Ross Perot ran for president, an oil man, and he sold books, and so Henry Kaiser is going to become this folk hero in the 1930s. And I suppose each of these other names I just mentioned, or we can name others, had their own appeal, but Kaiser's appeal was never stop, right? That anything is possible, right? Find a need and fill it, like on that side of that truck, right? And so he starts getting these nicknames, and I don't know if they were created by Kaiser's PR machine or created by the media. I don't know that, but these are names like Hurry Up Henry, America's can-do capitalist, Miracle Man Kaiser, right? He becomes this figure and people start to think like, well, maybe he can do anything, right? And politicians say, well, maybe he can do anything, and maybe we can attach our wagon to his pony, and we'll benefit from that, right? So in the 1930s, Kaiser's ready to hit the big time, right? He's been building infrastructure, he's been building his image, and he's been spending time on both, and to much success. One sort of final kind of piece of evidence that Kaiser was becoming a thing. Kaiser had pop songs written about him. I'm not sure how many, but still, I mean, this is still a thing, right? So before Kaiser builds his steel plant, he's already a figure of some renown and some visibility. And like I said, I mean, perhaps the word folk hero is a good one here. So Kaiser the folk hero is starting to make some waves, and he's looking around and where am I going to go next? He's always thinking, where am I going to go next? He's always thinking, what risk can I take that I can benefit from him? And so in the late 1930s, he was approached by the British government, and they were under siege, of course, from the Axis powers, and things weren't looking good for Great Britain. And so he was approached by the Admiralty, and the British government wanted Kaiser to build shipyards for cargo ships, right? And so Kaiser said, well, of course I can. I could do anything. I'm Miracle Man Kaiser. Of course I can. And after saying yes to building shipyards on the West Coast for these so-called tramp steamers, they're going to become the Liberty ship later in the war. They'll get this nickname. And so because he's Kaiser, he has the audacity to say, I can build these shipyards. I mean, I built tunnels and dams and approaches to bridges. Of course I can, but I can build the ships. But that would be maybe a step too, a bridge too far. No pun intended there. No construction pun intended there. But he teamed up with someone. Like he teamed up within 6 companies, right? Henry Kaiser can't build, Bonneville Dam by himself, but he can in that consortium. So hooking up with Todd Company, an established shipbuilder, Kaiser had some credibility. So Todd's an established name. Kaiser's miracle man,
Mhm.
right? He's, can-do capitalist, and two together were a convincing argument. The British Admiralty said, okay, fine. You can build the shipyards and you can build the ships. Henry Kaiser goes from building, laying asphalt and concrete on Highway 99 to building these cargo ships. And at this point, his name sort of takes on a whole nother level of respect and notoriety and so forth, right? So Kaiser had, as a contractor, had always been looking for ways to deliver faster and cheaper and better. And he loved that model. He's coming out of sort of corporate capitalism, late 19th century, of industrial production.
Mhm.
Maybe he could take the thinking used in Fordism, right? Now Ford built cars and so forth, and apply it to shipbuilding. As a sociologist, you're probably been introduced to the term de-skilling.
Yes.
So Kaiser will de-skill the construction of ships.
Yes.
And rather than use skilled men who own their tools, who belong to a union, who trained the folks who will follow them as journeymen and apprenticeship, right, and become skilled workers and so forth, and take the job and transform it fundamentally to a job that, dare I say, you and I could build a ship as long as you have a pulse.
Right.
You could build these ships now. Of course, you have to learn how to weld,
Uh-huh.
right? But you and I could do that.
Yeah.
My grandmother did that.
Wow.
My grandmother was a welder in World War II, not for Kaiser,
Mm-hmm.
but for Chicago Bridge and Iron in Humboldt County, where
Mhm.
we lived in Eureka. She went from being a cocktail waitress to a welder. She
Yeah.
built dry docks for Chicago Bridge and Iron there. And so the same model here, it's just larger. This is one of his shipyards there in the East Bay, right? Not too far from Napa, right?
Mhm.
And so he would, in a sense, sort of mass produce these ships, right? So he would build them in parts of them, weld them all together, and then this part would be carried over to another part and they'd be joined together, largely welded
Mhm.
as opposed to riveted. And riveting, as in terms of a fastener, it takes a lot of upper body strength and it's difficult to do it. Welding's difficult. I'm a poor welder. You don't want me welding anything. I've welded, but it's not pretty. So, but you can train a
Yeah.
person like you, me, or my grandmother to weld. And so these are largely welded ships, oftentimes by women,
Mhm.
right? Because Kaiser is flexible enough to do that in his approach to things. So I think that there were some hiccups
Mhm.
and there were some, problems with the Liberty ships. People who were less impressed with them called them Kaiser coffins.
Ooh.
We could talk about that, I suppose, and so, but still, the amount of production that came out of these yards is amazing. I mean,
Mhm.
about 1,500 ships of different kind.
Mhm.
Most of them are like these 110,000 ton ships here, right? These are pretty good sized ships. Some baby flat tops and some other stuff, but that's an amazing record
Yeah.
for a guy that was building, highways before the war. He's turning out these ships here in just a matter of years. It is amazing. And by this time, right, during the war, he is an absolute celebrity.
Mhm. Absolutely. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. That was incredibly illustrative. In sociology, we call it tailorization.
Oh,
not
yeah, sure. That makes
de-skilling.
sense.
So, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay, sure.
Yeah. But so how did this miracle man Kaiser, how did he get into the steel industry?
Yeah, well, it's a little less clear, but there's little hints here and there in the historical record of why he makes this transition. The first thing I'll just ask people to remember is that Kaiser was restless
Mhm.
from his time as youth. He's restless. He's got this successful business. That's not satisfying enough, right? And so he's going to move from thing to thing. And so he had been a contractor and a real successful one. He had been a shipbuilder and a real successful one. It appears that as he's leaving being a contractor and moving into this phase here when he's being a shipbuilder, he's thinking of other paths for him to take. Kaiser had been working on infrastructure, really, since the 19 teens. And he had a sense, and I don't know how to explain this, other than he had a sense that the West, particularly California, more particularly Los Angeles,
Mhm.
was going to take off. It had been growing consistently through the 20th century. And Kaiser had this sense, especially with the war coming in, the war after America jumped in, that after the war, Los Angeles was going to not only continue growing, but was going to explode in growth. And there was going to be this exodus of people from the East from the eastern states here to the west. Sorry, I'm laughing, but
Aberdeen here,
I'm son-
yeah.
I'm son of California. I'm a son of
Yeah.
California. We're sons of California,
Right.
right? And so he was just convinced that this was a takeoff moment
Mhm.
for the West, California, and especially Los Angeles. And so California was going to be this place where he was already established, had already settled there, right, from the 1920s. And so it appears as early as 1937, he starts sharing these dreams with some of his lieutenants. I do have a picture here of a couple of them. Let's see, here's one. Here, so the man on the right here is Jack Ashby, and of course in the middle there is the boss. That's Henry J, and that's Mr. McManus. He's a Fontana plant manager, actually on site. But there's three of them there, and so Jack Ashby, the man on the right, was stationed in Oakland, and he was like the boss of Kaiser Steel, right? You know, and so he was the manager, the vice president, and so Jack Ashby had to give a lot of speeches. I was able to read a number of them, and he said very clearly in his speech after World War II, quote, 1937 was the year when Henry J. Kaiser told me that he wanted to enter steel making, right? Right. That year has been given elsewhere too, but never more clear than by Jack Ashby in that one speech that he gave to some business people in the 1950s. So he wanted to create this steel mill but at the same time he's going into shipbuilding, and he from the very get-go had a very clear idea of what the steel plant would look like, and this was not going to be any kind of a steel plant, just any steel plant. It wasn't going to be a small one. It was going to be a big one. And Kaiser wanted something very particular. And there's a few things about Henry Kaiser's personality that are interesting. One, that he was tremendously stubborn. He was famous for being stubborn. He almost ruined I wouldn't say almost ruined, but in his aluminum company, for example, which was a cash cow and made hundreds of millions of dollars for years.
Wow.
Kaiser was convinced that aluminum foil that we use in the home, that was going to be the pathway to success will be aligned with aluminum foil. No, it's not. And all these people around him said, boss, we know you love aluminum, we love you, but this is the hill we're gonna die on. Okay. So all these parts of Kaiser aluminum are making money, except for Kaiser foil, which was around for a while. We finally had to let that go because it wasn't the big money maker, but he's very reluctant to let things go, right? And so what he wanted from the late 1930s was a vertically integrated steel plant. He was very clear about that. If he's going to go into steel, it's going to be a company where he would have control over ore. Like he would dig rocks out of the ground, take those rocks and make them into metal, right? And take that metal and make it into products that I'd sell consumers. So up and down, vertically integrated, right? He had no interest, as far as I can tell, in interviews given by his lieutenants, by speeches that some of these business people left. I have no indication that he ever wanted to build like a melt shop where he would take, a scrap, which there's plenty of in California, melt it up, make a big old plate, and then jump ahead here a little bit to roll that into ship plate for living ships. He never said that he wanted a mill that would take like maybe big steel ingots created by some of the steel company and roll those into ship plate. The only thing he ever articulated that I read was that he wanted a fully integrated steel plant, like the big boys, like US Steel, like Bethlehem, integrated producers. They have a full line of products. That's how success looked, until like by the 1980s or so. The big guys in steel were fully integrated. They had coal mines and they had iron ore mines, right? And they made this metal from rocks, and then they would they would make these products and sell to the consumer. That's the model that Kaiser wanted to follow. No other model, right? And so he was really insistent upon that. He had to put his steel-making dream on ice, no pun intended, or just for a short while, not very long. It appears that 1940 was the year where the rubber met the road there, right? And by 1940, he's built some shipyards. He's starting to build ships. and he wants to break into steel. So we're talking about breaking into a couple of industries basically at once.
Yeah.
It's not cautious.
No.
It's not cautious. And I could never be an entrepreneur.
Right.
I don't have the nerve, the audacity to think that you could do that. But Kaiser did repeatedly, right? So he's going to move so quickly, right? And so, but 1940 though, you can't just open your own steel plant. By 1940, America was so close to war, right? And by that time, our economy had been sort of taken over by the government, but heavily regulated by the government, so that fuel oil, fire brick, pipe, sheet metal, all these metals were carefully controlled by the government because there was so little of it. We were preparing for war, coming out of the Depression, there were shortages, and so Kaiser couldn't just buy all the material. He couldn't have just build a blast furnace, for example, without federal okay. So starting in 1940, Henry Kaiser started approaching the federal government asking for the okay here. And that's something Kaiser could do. Kaiser could knock on doors, and Kaiser could make phone calls. Kaiser had worked with bureaucrats for years. Kaiser was a well-known entity and not always appreciated, because Kaiser was more than just a gadfly. Kaiser was the pain in the posterior of many people. And he was relentless. It's kind of like LBJ that way, the treatment, right? Henry Kaiser was relentless. Like, give me this permission, give me this permission, give me this permission. I want this permission. You should give me this permission. And then if that wasn't enough, his lieutenants are also chiming in, right? So in 1940, he starts making formal requests to the federal government. These reports are now available to Americans, the National Archives, right, would see these things, right? And so at the point we're talking about here in 1940, Kaiser's not talking about a plant in Fontana. Interestingly enough, Kaiser doesn't mention Fontana at all in 1940 or in 41. Fontana is nowhere to be seen. Now, he's got a list of cities he'd love to build his plants and his facilities in. Happy to throw these kind of nuggets to all sorts of cities. Fontana's not one of them. And he's consistently shot down by the government, right? And maybe the reason that is because these government agencies were staffed and led by industry leaders, big guys, U.S. Steel and Bethlehem guys, and they really don't care for Henry J. Kaiser. Henry Kaiser loved being a maverick, and he loved tweaking power. He loved doing that, right? He didn't like to be on the receiving end of that, but he loved to kind of to be that sort of gadfly, to be that kind of bothersome character, right? And so, he's rejected, he's rebuffed every time, but there's something that's going to happen that will change everything, and that is the attack by Japanese forces on the American military there in Hawaii, and the attack on Pearl Harbor will change everything.
Interesting.
And the resistance to increasing our capacity of steelmaking in this country melts, evaporates. Suddenly, we don't have excess capacity. Now we have, oh my gosh, we have all this incredible need. We need Henry Kaiser. Well, that changes the tone and tenor of those meetings he has with politicos immediately. And so quickly, right, the talks start to just get more focused. And so Kaiser's going to get his integrated plant finally. Great. Kaiser, I'm not saying he lied. I don't know that he lied, but Kaiser was not entirely forthcoming about the coal assets in Southern California. How's that?
Right.
He was not entirely forthcoming with the iron assets in Southern California either, right? And okay, but he with these talks proceed, but the federal government was reluctant to give Kaiser the green light to build in any of the sites that he liked, because Kaiser wanted to build this plant on deep water. Napa would have been fine. The East Bay, Oakland, Berkeley, that had been fine. Los Angeles Harbor, that's fine. U.S. Steel wanted to build there too, right? And the government said, no, 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 and no. We will not give you the green light to build an integrated steel facility on deep water. But with the mountains of coal coming in and the mountains of iron ore coming in and the very heavy material going out, water, transportation makes perfect sense. And so much of steel production takes place on deep water. So Kaiser was taking a page from a well-used playbook, right?
Mhm.
But the government says, that's fine, but this is an unusual environment here. You see, the Japanese can shell your ships, your plants. And I think it'd be easy today if you didn't know the history to say, those people in Washington, they're really overreacting. The Japanese can't shell California, but they did in 1942. They shelled Long Beach. They shelled up and down the coast in the Long Beach area. It destroyed some oil production there.
Mhm.
So Uncle Sam was not being the regulators there, the bureaucrats were not being paranoid in their reluctance to give Kaiser that okay to build, or the denial to build on deep water. So they start looking inland. Where is Kaiser gonna, where can they set up safely? And so the government said, how about Barstow, California? How about putting a great big steel plant in Barstow? Kaiser said, I'm not gonna build in Barstow. There's nothing in Barstow for me, right? And so back and forth, finally, someone suggests the Inland Empire, Fontana specifically, right? And Fontana wasn't terribly well known. Fontana is probably most famous for being the recipient of Los Angeles garbage. LA garbage was trained from Los Angeles, taken to Fontana and dumped out there for hogs to eat. Back when we talk about food a lot, you and I, and back in the 1930s and 20s, people cooked from scratch a lot, and they, vegetables and fruit cores and skins and stuff like that, and less packaging, right? And pigs will eat just about anything.
Right.
Almost like a goat, right? And so we used to feed pigs garbage. We have for hundreds of years. Caucasians, Europeans have done it for years. Pigs will eat almost anything, including people. They'll eat all sorts of stuff, right? And so that's why Fontana was known as this pig capital of the world, right? The garbage capital of the world, right? But they had this nexus of railroads there. They had good highway system there. It's 50 miles away from Los Angeles, so you could tap into that marketplace. There's quite a bit of underground water in Fontana, very little above ground, right? Because it's like it is a desert, like 10 inches of rain a year or so. And then Kaiser argued, well, right over the hill, there's coal and there's iron, and up in the mountains, there's plenty of limestone, and we can get the stuff, we can do this, right? And so the official said, fine, you're a miracle man, Kaiser, make this happen. And so he gets the okay, and Kaiser Steel is born. And here's a picture of the blowing in ceremony. This takes place in the last few days of 1942. This is an amazing performance, even for Miracle Man Kaiser, to go from, okay, you can build a steel plant, to literally shooing pigs off of the land that they purchased, right? And erecting this integrated steel plant. A point of local interest for our Napa audience here. I think the name Trefethen is of some visibility in Napa, and the Napa-based winery, Trefethen Winery, is so called because of this man here. So there's Henry J, hard-charging Henry J there at the microphone. Right behind him, looking the opposite direction, is his son, Henry Jr. And then the man with glasses and dark hair, looking towards Kaiser, right behind him there, is Eugene E. Trefethen, longtime Kaiser aide, confidant, a best friend of Henry Kaiser's son, Edgar. They were both students at Cal, in the same fraternity, stuff like that. And so for those of you who want to support Kaiser Steel, sort of like indirectly, go buy a nice bottle of Trefethen Cabernet or something like that. So connection there. So so his pathway to steel was an interesting one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. Can you say a little bit more about about vertical integration, and especially how that hooks up with Basalt Rock eventually?
Oh, right. Okay. So what Kaiser wants to do is to control all the inputs that he can, right? All the ore inputs. And if you're going to make steel from rocks, there's a couple of rocks that you need. You need to have iron ore, right? Because steel is a ferrous metal, right? Ferrum, right? Iron. And so you need iron ore, okay? And you need coal, at least in most ways to make steel, you need coal. And not any coal will do, only coal that can be coked. baked into a kind of charcoal of sorts, right?
Yeah.
Also called metallurgical coal. So
Uh-huh.
not any coal will do. So most of the coal in California
Not good.
won't do. No,
Ah.
it's not metallurgical grade coal, but whatever, details, right? And then you need some other material. You need some other rocks too. Limestone is a flexing agent, right, to gather up impurities, and then you can like scrape that off the top in its molten state. And then you might want to make some kind of small adjustments to your ingredients, put in some manganese, put in some nickel, something like that. But the three big ones are iron, coal, and limestone, right? Okay. Those are available in some quality, in some amount, some quantity and some quality in Southern California, right? And so immediately, as soon as he gets the okay, Henry Kaiser starts at the front end of vertical integration, all the inputs, right? And so the first thing he's able to do is to secure rather easily an iron ore source. Not a big one, not even a very good one.
Mhm.
It's a close one, right? And they had a motivated seller. I love that term, right? It's called the Vulcan Mine, and it's by Kelso. It's out in the desert. It's almost in Nevada, right? It's in Riverside County, and it's about 180 miles away from Fontana. And I have a picture here of the facilities. That's where the miners lived. Okay, but that's what the topography looks like.
Yeah.
You know, as you're out Riverside County, and you're going east towards Nevada, and it's almost lunar.
Yeah. That's a great descriptor of the area out there.
Yeah, it's really
It's the
something.
color you've never seen before anywhere else.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And it's not black and white, it's
Right.
tan, you know.
Yeah, yeah, it really is
Yeah.
lunar, yeah.
Right, yes. You know, and for our audience, if you put the Vulcan mine in a search engine, you'll see some pictures
Yeah.
of the actual mine itself, and it's not big. Right, there's there's a couple of power shovels and there's some dump trucks,
Mhm.
and that's what's moving this ore. It's not a huge operation, and Kaiser knew that. There are folks, plenty of them, that will say that, well, Kaiser went into steel because he couldn't get enough steel for his ships. Well, it's true, he couldn't get enough steel for his ships, but if all he wanted to do was to build steel for ships, the Vulcan mine is more than enough.
Mhm.
But he didn't want just this. While he was securing Vulcan Mine, he's already thinking about the post-war period, and he's working on getting a title to an exponentially bigger and better mine, and that's Eagle Mountain. And I'm sure that our audience members have heard all sorts of stories about Eagle Mountain and its changing of ownership over the years. Eagle Mountain is owned by some folks, and they didn't want to sell. They knew what they had, so they were kind of holding out. Kaiser was trying to get a piece of a 50 or 75-year source of iron ore from the start. This long game. It's always this long game for Kaiser when it comes to moving into steel. He's always thinking long game. So the Kelso mine, this Vulcan mine, is fine. It's not real high quality. There's a lot of overburden, it has to be scraped off first. He has to truck the ore like 7 miles in these big, Euclid dump trucks, and then to get to a rail spur. It's not ideal, right? But he secures it right away. And that's going to supply Fontana through the war and the next couple of years afterwards. Kaiser will then move into coal. There's coal in California, but not coal that will coke, not coal that you can burn and turn into coke. And he doesn't have to go just 200 miles or 500 miles. The closest coal is 1,200 miles.
Wow.
Right. So he has to go to, it's often called the Sunnyside mine in Utah, and he will lease that mine, and that will be the coal source for Kaiser Steel through the war years, through the 1950s, 1,200 miles away. And then he's always thinking long game. And so he says, oh, and look, there's this coal I can buy. And it's this huge, I'll never run out of coal. 1,800 miles away in New Mexico, right? I'll buy that too, Raton, right there on the border, right? At the north part of New Mexico, right? So Kaiser will, and he'll do that in the late 1950s. So Kaiser secures the two big ones right away. Limestone he buys off the market and then purchases that mine in the Lucerne Valley. You go up to Big Bear, you can keep going over to Victorville. And so it's right there. And I think that mine is still producing product, as a matter of fact, right? So he purchases or he leases the plant or he purchases coal, iron, and limestone right away. And so he's producing product right away, right? He's producing ship plates, he produces some shapes and artillery shell casings right away. He's a vertically integrated producer right away. So the first iron is made in late 42, the first steel in 43. He's a vertically integrated producer. And the war breaks out. And so it's Miracle Man Kaiser doing his miracle thing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
He's vertically integrated right away. He will continue that after the war. Right. So during the war, Kaiser, it's all the government could do just to rein in Henry Kaiser. Kaiser is looking continuously for ways for the federal government. He's a very patriotic man. I'm not questioning his patriotism. But he's thinking, how can Uncle Sam pay for my post-war, production? He asked for a great big electric furnace. He doesn't need an electric furnace. And the government says, you don't need an electric furnace. You got a blast furnace. That's all you need. You have like these open heart. It's all you're fine. No, I need this electric furnace. No, you don't. Finally, they wear down by Kaiser. They gave him a small electric furnace. Right? He's continuously looking. What can I do to get ready for the post-war years, right? And so as soon as the war is over, he continues that vertical integration, right? He does continue to buy more sourcing. He will continue to do that through the 70s, right? He'll go international. He'll get iron ore in Australia. They'll get coal in British Columbia. But more to your question, what about like basalt, right? Rock. And so after the war ends, he'll start working hard on vertical integration at the finished end, right? Closer to the consumer, right? So in 1954, he makes a couple of purchases. Myers Drum of Los Angeles, which is still in business, actually. And Myers Drum made paint cans and 55-gallon barrels and all sorts of stuff like that. And they still make all manner of things. And Myers Drum used Kaiser Steel. So it seemed like a perfect thing to pick up, right? So they purchased Kaiser purchases Myers Drum. And then the very next year, Kaiser took control of a couple of fabricators, Union Steel in Montebello, and then Basalt Rock in Napa. Basalt Rock, kind of like Myers Drum, was a natural kind of company for Kaiser Steel to take over because they had been Kaiser Steel customers. A little bit on Basalt. There is a really terrific interview at the Napa Historical Society of Jack Streblow, which the staff there gave me access to. And Streblow's father created Basalt in the 1920s, and as suggested by the name, they worked in aggregate and stone and so forth, right? Hence the name. And in one of their pits of source material, they have quite a bit of basalt. The rock, basalt in it, right? And so Streblow in his interview says, so we have all this basalt. And he said, I know what the company's called. My father created it. I don't know why this company that would extract this basalt called themselves Basalt, but they did. As a side note, because I spent so much time in Petaluma as a kid, I was introduced to the word BASALT through this company, Basalt Rock. And so I thought the company and the rock were called Basalt. Imagine my surprise.
Yeah.
As a college student at Humboldt State up in Arcadia, I took geology course and I learned that wasn't the case. But that volcanic rock is actually called basalt. Didn't know that until I was about 19.
Wow.
Yeah, about that. Anyway, so this company grows quickly and starts moving in these kind of new directions. And so Basalt they make a couple of barges. They're there on deep water. They can move around material. Awesome. And then the war comes around. They've been making barges and small boats anyway. We are in a great need for ships. And so Basalt Rock became a shipbuilder, right? And these are legitimate vessels here, right? They built a couple of dozen vessels during World War II. It's probably widely known in the area. I'm sure all the folks who are watching this are aware of this part of the history, right? but they used Kaiser Steel in many of their products. And so once again, when Kaiser in the 50s, when Kaiser was looking for companies closer to the consumer that they can feed their steel into, Basalt was a natural kind of company to purchase. I mean, perfect sense, right, to marry those two. So just think of it that way. So Kaiser always wanted to go from extracting out of the earth rocks, or reducing them to some kind of metal, fashioning that metal into shapes, and then into products for the consumer. That's vertical integration. So if Kaiser Steel was a highly vertically integrated company, that's exactly what he wanted to do, because that's what the big boys did.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I think we're probably running out of time here at this point.
Oh my, really?
Yeah. So
Oh.
I wanted to ask you what's next for you on this project?
Yeah. I thought that after I wrote this book, I'd be done with Kaiser Steel, finished with it. And then a library in Southern California said, "Hey, would you like to make a presentation?" I said, "Sure." I'm in South Dakota. We'll do it over Zoom. All right. And so I've been doing that, and I'll continue to do that for a while more, I think, as long as there's interest, and there appears to be. I'd like to move into Kaiser aluminum. I'd love to. It's an interesting story. There are a couple of books on Kaiser aluminum. It's a fascinating story. Kaiser loved light metals, magnesium and aluminum. He loved, right? He thought all this potential. Some of our audience, for example, might know about the magnesium goop. The Kaiser made for incendiary bombs in World War II. Horrific and effective, right? But that's a Kaiser product, right? So Kaiser is just mesmerized by it. So I'd like to do some work on Kaiser aluminum.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Dias. This has been a really enlightening evening. And I guess I'll pass it back to our hosts here. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for this this fascinating. I grew up in Napa, as many of the people on tonight did, and of course, like you, I thought, well, actually, I had a geologist as a father, so he corrected me at every turn. It's not basalt, it's basalt. But we grew up with it. I went to school with the Streblos, so I know that.
Oh, that's amazing.
And I think that this is just part of the fabric of this valley. We often get mesmerized by the juggernaut, wine, and hotels and resorts, because those were really the very, very early commercial ventures. But this valley had so much more. And to see that we had, Kaiser Steel, which was building ships, and we have in our collection many pictures of the ships they built here, that they were dismantling ships here too, which is hardly known at all. And then we had this major quarry which was producing rocks of all different kinds, and that much of our architecture in the valley is a product of that. And so, although I don't know that Henry ever visited Napa, but I'm sure he did, but that we had this, this juggernaut in the world who came to Napa and helped us build something that was an amazing industry here, and is still, it's still there. You can drive right past Basalt, and it's now called Sayre, and you can see from the river, you can still see the Kaiser Steel plant. So these are all things that are still landmarks in our valley. For those of you tonight who joined us, maybe you want to turn off your mute, raise your hands, and give a big clap to Ric, because this was just a great talk and a great way to start our season. So thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you all so much for doing.
Thank you.
I see the hands all clapping there. That's
excellent.
So that's great. We've got I'm an alum of Kaiser Engineer, and I worked on the 17th floor of the Kaiser building in Oakland. Henry was a visionary, not only in steel and metals, but also in engineering and healthcare. So you've got the real thing on tonight, here in the crowd. So someone who was paying attention. So thank you. Thank you all once again for coming tonight. And I hope that if you're not members or signed up for our newsletters, that you do so you can see what else we have coming. next month, or well, I should just say this Saturday, we will open the Haas Blacksmith Shop. We call it a house party. When we do, we have demonstrations in blacksmithing and farriering. And you
Oh.
can see what a 19th century blacksmith shop looked like, because Henry never changed a thing. Anyway, another Henry house. So,
Right.
so anyway, so we have that this Saturday from 11 to 3:30. So please, if you are up in Pope Valley, stop by, see us. I believe we're going to have lemonade, so it's really fun. Also, next week, for those of you who feel the desperate need to put on a costume for Halloween, we will have Trickster Saturday at the museum. Where it's the one time a year we really serve the younger community of Napa. We will open the doors from 11 to 1:30. Last year we did 3,300 kids through the door in that period of time.
That's amazing.
And we served 120 gallons of candy to the kids. So they love it. It's scary. We'll have scary music again, and all kinds of, and the wonderful scary stuff. So we hope maybe you join us. Also then on Sunday, we have the Spooktacular tour. As it has begun a big thing here for the Historical Society. Although we do tours of the cemetery all the time, this one, probably envisioned by Nancy Brennan, but carried out by us, is all in, we have costumed characters throughout the cemetery, waiting to tell you their story. We lie through our teeth, but we have a wonderful time, and it sold out in 24 hours again this year. So it is an extremely popular event with us, and that will top off the month of October, which has been, we opened a new show on architecture. We've had Rick and Lucas tonight. We will have the house open, and we will have both Trickster Saturday and Spooktacular Sunday this month. So thank you all. Please do join. If not, please sign up for our newsletter so you can stay on top of all the events. I would like to thank Rick and Lucas once again. Dr. Wiscons, Dr. Dias, it was a true treat to hear this tonight. And thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
That's great, Shelley. And you know, if folks want to do some further reading on Kaiser, it can be done pretty easily. If people want to, I think that you might have a couple copies of my Kaiser Steel book there at your Historical Society. I believe they're signed.
Oh, yeah. So if you want an author signed book, we got them in our gift shop. Please come in and catch them.
There's a small number there. And if people contact me, there's my email address. I'm happy to sell them a book. And I believe in the copies of the book that you folks have there in Napa and the ones that I sell too. I have a bibliography of Kaiser related books. I've got 17 titles here. Books on his car company, his aluminum company, steel, the shipbuilding, and so forth. So for further reading, see me.
See Professor Dias.
See Professor Dias.
Yeah, the Kaiser Whisperer.
Right, that's right.
Yeah.
That's a new term.
There you go.
That's a fresh term right there.
Oh yeah, that's a great. Well, we can't wait to have you back again. We'll hear about the aluminum. Maybe you'll do something on the shipwrecking in Napa, because we spoke earlier about how exciting that is to someone like me. Anyway, and so how wonderful, and thank you all for coming tonight, and we'll see you next month if you're interested. Next month is Ray Gadani and Judge Croyer, and they will be talking about the Lenvest scandal in Napa. So